Hey guys, and welcome back to Thread Tension. Imagine sitting down for a chemistry exam and realizing the easiest way to protect your grade might be going to your professor's Bible study. Yeah, that's basically what OP thought was happening here, because this professor didn't just make the test ridiculously hard. According to OP, he put material on it the class hadn't even covered yet, and then offered 3 points of extra credit on a 10-point exam if students showed up to his religious event. And at first, you might hear that and think, okay, maybe this is just one weird, awkward college email. It wasn't, because the more OP explained, the worse this started to look. And by the time the department stepped in, it stopped sounding like a quirky professor and started sounding like somebody who forgot that a chemistry grade is not a recruitment tool. The title of this post is, "Teacher is making exams super hard and offering extra credit if you attend his Bible study." And I'm telling you right now, the part that hooked me wasn't even the Bible study. It was the fact that OP was scared to report him, not because they thought it was okay, because they couldn't afford to be wrong. So OP posts basically in panic mode and says, "Please tell me I'm not insane, because this can't be okay in a college setting, right?" They say their chemistry teacher is putting stuff on the exam they haven't even studied for yet, and at the same time offering extra credit if students attend his Bible study. And not a token little half point either. 3 points on a 10-point exam. That's already bad. But here's why this gets uglier the longer you sit with it. If this were just some professor being openly religious in his personal life, fine. Plenty of professors are religious. Nobody cares. If he wanted to go to Bible study on his own time, fine. If he wanted to join a campus faith group, fine. But the second you connect a student's grade to attendance at your religious event, you've crossed the line so hard it's not even blurry anymore. Now it's pressure. Now it's leverage. Now it's, "Hey, I'm the guy grading your work, and just so you know, there are points sitting over here if you show up to the thing I want you at." And that changes everything, especially because OP says this is a community college in California, and this is chemistry, not theology, not religious studies, chemistry. So naturally, people in the comments are like, "No, absolutely not. Contact the department chair." And this is where the story gets really believable, because OP's first instinct isn't rage, it's fear. They ask if there's any way to stay anonymous because they can't afford to drop the class. The refund deadline has passed, and classes are hard to get into because of the waitlist. That right there tells you everything about why people in positions of authority get away with sketchy stuff for as long as they do. It's not just that they have power, it's that the people under them usually have something to lose: money, credits, time, a semester, a spot in a required class. And from the outside, it's easy to say, just report him. But when you're the one trapped in the class, that doesn't feel simple at all. Because now the question isn't just, is this wrong? Now the question is, if I say something and he figures out it was me, what does the rest of my semester look like? And honestly, the second OP said that, I already knew why this story got as far as it did, because people like this don't need everyone to agree with them. They just need enough people to stay quiet. Then OP shares the actual email, and somehow the actual email makes it worse. Because according to OP, the message announces an extra credit event called Jesus, Son of David, Bible study, praise, worship, and explicitly says attendees will receive 3 points for exam 1. Then it adds another detail that somehow makes the whole thing feel even more inappropriate. He says he wants to make a Christian club at the school and discuss its future direction at that meeting. So this isn't even just, come to Bible study. It's, come to Bible study, get points on your exam, and while you're here, help me launch the thing I want to run. That is insane. You are not supposed to use your class like a built-in audience for your personal club project. And you definitely aren't supposed to dangle grade benefits over students while you do it. Even one commenter who said they were a devout Christian and had gone to Christian schools was like, "Nope, this is not okay. A chemistry professor should be giving extra credit on chemistry things, not Bible study attendance." Exactly. But this next part is where it started looking less like one dumb decision and more like a really ugly pattern, because OP says there was already a Christian group on campus. So now OP's sitting there thinking, wait a second, are you seriously trying to start a second one that you'd control? And using my chemistry grade to get bodies in the room? That is wild. And while all that's happening, the academic side of this thing is still getting worse. OP says there was a practice exam link that was hard to find on Canvas, and it had questions from chapters they weren't even supposed to start until mid-March. So OP's been cramming on content that shouldn't even be relevant yet, and then this email drops offering exactly the kind of extra credit that suddenly starts to matter a whole lot more. And this is the detail that really got me, because if the class hasn't covered the material, and the exam includes it anyway, and the extra credit just happens to be worth enough to patch over part of that damage, you can see why students would start feeling cornered. That's what makes this feel manipulative. Nobody has to say, you must attend. Nobody has to say, your religion will affect your grade. All you have to do is create the kind of system where students start thinking, okay, I don't want to go, but can I afford not to? That's the whole trick. It gives the person on top plausible deniability, while everybody underneath feels the pressure loud and clear. Eventually, OP emails the chair, and I've got to give them credit here, because that's the moment a lot of people freeze. They're nervous. They're worried they won't stay anonymous. They're worried about retaliation, but they do it anyway. Then there's a short update, and at this point the tension's basically all in the waiting, because once you report somebody, your brain starts spinning. Did I overreact? Are they gonna ignore it? Did I just make things worse for myself? Is he gonna know it was me? That part is brutal. OP says they emailed both HR and the chair of the chemistry department, and now they're just hoping something actually comes of it. Then the responses come in, and this is where the story finally starts to turn. First, HR replies, thanks them for reaching out, says the concern is being forwarded to a senior HR generalist for review, and specifically notes that OP requested anonymity. That's already a decent sign, because at least it means the complaint didn't just disappear into a void. But the really important response comes from the chemistry chair. Because the chair tells OP they're sorry OP was put in a position that made them uncomfortable, says the announcement was not sponsored by the chemistry department, and makes it very clear that participation in any religious activity is not required and will not affect your grade in any way. The chair also says they addressed the matter directly with the professor and kept OP's name confidential while looking into it. That is exactly the response you want. Clean, direct, no waffling. No, I'm sure he meant well. No, let's all be respectful of different viewpoints. Just, this was inappropriate, it's being addressed, and your grade will not be tied to any of this. Perfect. And what I like about OP in this story is they still come off super reasonable. They say they don't want the guy fired. They just felt like it was unfair that Christians, or really anyone willing to attend this Bible study so he could start his own club, would get a better shot at passing the class. And that's such a normal response. OP isn't trying to destroy this man's life. They're not offended that religion exists. They're not making some giant speech. They're saying one very basic thing. I signed up for chemistry. My grade should depend on chemistry. That should not be a controversial standard. But then OP drops one more detail, and this is the part that makes the whole thing look even worse in hindsight. They say the exam involved Chapter 6 even though the class had only been taught up through Chapter 4, and the page for Chapter 6 was worth 3 points. 3 points, the exact same value as the Bible study extra credit. Now, maybe that was a coincidence. Maybe, but you can see why that's the moment this stopped looking merely reckless and started looking suspicious as hell. Because now the structure is basically, put untaught material on the test, make that section worth 3 points, then offer 3 points for showing up to your religious event. Even if that wasn't planned as neatly as it looks, the effect is the same. The students who go along with it are protected. The students who don't are exposed, and that's a problem. OP also says none of this was on the syllabus, including the fact that the professor would apparently use AI to generate half his lessons, which is almost like a bonus red flag at that point. It's not even the main issue anymore, but it definitely doesn't make this guy sound more credible. Then we get the final update, and honestly, this is the payoff you want in a story like this. OP says this is the first level of chemistry at that college, and while the material on the test would eventually be covered later, it absolutely had not been taught yet when the exam happened. Because of that, the board stepped in and gave everyone 10 out of 10 on the test since it included things they couldn't reasonably have known, and the professor, according to OP, was put on a sort of probation. That is such a deserved ending. Because let's be honest, This wasn't one awkward email. This was a professor creating a situation where students could reasonably feel like their grade was being linked to attendance at a religious event, while also testing them on material they hadn't been taught yet. That is not a harmless little misunderstanding. That is a serious abuse of judgment, and I think that's why this story lands so hard. A lot of people have had some version of this authority figure before. Maybe not literally a professor offering Bible study points, but the kind of person who takes a role that's supposed to come with responsibility and turns it into leverage. The kind of person who relies on people being too nervous, too dependent, too financially stuck, or too unsure of themselves to push back. The kind of person who makes everyone uncomfortable but counts on each individual person thinking, maybe I'm the only one who sees how wrong this is. That's why OP speaking up matters. Because once somebody finally says, no, this isn't normal, the whole thing starts collapsing pretty fast. And thankfully, in this case, the school actually did something. They protected OP's anonymity. They corrected the grade issue. They addressed the religious extra credit nonsense. And they put the professor under scrutiny. That's what accountability's supposed to look like. Not endless excuses. Not a cover-up. Not, let's just move on. Just, we looked at it, it was wrong, and we fixed what we could. Honestly, the most satisfying part of this whole story is that OP trusted their gut, because people talk themselves out of obvious red flags all the time. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe this is normal. Maybe everybody else is fine with it. Maybe I just don't get how college works. Nope. If your chemistry professor makes the exam weirdly hard and then offers grade-related extra credit for showing up to Bible study, your gut isn't malfunctioning, your gut's doing its job. And good for OP for listening to it. Because if nobody says anything, people like this keep pushing until they finally find the line. And this time, he found it. But here's the thing. As bad as this was, the next story is worse in a completely different way. Because in that one, the red flags were obvious too, and people still kept letting it slide until the damage was already done. But here's the thing. As bad as that first story was, at least somebody eventually stepped in and stopped it. This next one, nobody needed to guess who the villain was, because this wasn't a professor abusing his position. This was a husband who looked at his spouse getting cancer and decided the marriage was only worth keeping if the hard part was over. And somehow, unbelievably, that still wasn't the worst part, because after he left, after the surgery, after the chemo, after all the fear and hell and recovery, the second he found out the treatment had worked, he tried to stop the divorce and stay married. Yeah, that's where we're going. The title of this post is, "He wants to call off my divorce because my cancer treatment was successful." And this is one of those stories where the title already sounds evil, and somehow the details are worse. Because this wasn't burnout. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't two people slowly falling apart under pressure. This was a guy who treated marriage like a subscription. The minute it stopped being convenient, he canceled it. And the second he realized OP had survived anyway, suddenly he wanted back in. So OP says he was diagnosed with testicular cancer, and that alone is enough to turn your entire life upside down. You're terrified. You're trying to process the diagnosis. You're hearing words you never wanted to hear. You're meeting doctors, thinking about surgery, thinking about treatment, thinking about survival. And in the middle of all that, the one person who's supposed to be your safe place looks at the situation and decides it's too much work. Because according to OP, 7 days after the diagnosis, his husband told him he was leaving because it would be too much to take care of him, and because he didn't sign up to be a nurse. Let that sit there. Not after years of caregiving, not after trying and failing, not after some long emotional collapse. 7 days, a week. And I'm gonna be honest, that is one of those lines that tells you everything you need to know about a person in about 10 words. Because what that really means is, I liked being married to you while it was easy. That's what he meant. Apparently, in sickness and in health was just decorative. Apparently, love was fine right up until love required character. And what makes this part hit even harder is that OP says he'd actually been warned this can happen. He says that a few days after the diagnosis, when he met with the oncologist, medical staff warned him that men sometimes leave their spouses when there's a serious illness. And OP says he genuinely thought that would never happen to him. A few days later, he found out they were right. And later, OP said every person in his support group who was married to a man had it happen too. That is brutal. Because imagine already dealing with cancer, and now the professionals around you are gently trying to prepare you for the possibility that your partner might bail too. And then he does? So now OP isn't just sick. He's sick and abandoned. He's dealing with the diagnosis, the fear, the treatment plan, the emotional fallout, and a divorce at the exact same time. And this is where the story gets even uglier. Because OP wasn't dealing with some tiny scare that passed in a week. He says he spent almost a full year going through treatment, surgery, chemotherapy, and in his own words, chemo almost killed him. So while OP is fighting through all of that, this husband is nowhere. No loyalty, no backbone, no real love, nothing. He looked at a partner in crisis and decided, actually, I'd rather not be inconvenienced. That's who this guy is. And that's why some of the comments hit so hard, because people were basically saying, good, now you know exactly who he is and he can't take that back. And honestly, they were right, because people like this always want to be judged by the version of themselves they imagine they are. But character is not who you are when life is easy. Character is who you are when the person beside you is terrified, weak, hurting, and needs you the most. That is the test. And this guy failed it almost immediately. But then the story gets worse, because if leaving after the diagnosis made him a coward, what he did next made him shameless. OP says that in August of the following year, after the surgery and chemo, he was finally told there was no evidence of disease. Think about that moment. After months of fear, pain, treatment, and uncertainty, he survives. He gets through it. He hears the words every cancer patient is desperate to hear, no evidence of disease. That should have been the beginning of peace. But somehow this man's ex found a way to make even that about himself, because OP says that once his husband found out he'd gotten better, and OP doesn't even know how he found out, he suddenly wanted to withdraw the divorce application and stay married after all. Yeah, now he wants the marriage. Now he wants another chance. Now he wants to work things out. And now he's shocked OP doesn't want him back. That is one of the most shameless things I've ever heard. This man really looked at cancer like it was a temporary inconvenience in his marriage. He bailed when OP needed him most, and then came back like he still deserved the healed version. Like the marriage was worth saving now that chemo was over. Like he could skip the suffering, skip the loyalty, skip the vows, skip the hard part, and still collect the relationship afterward. Absolutely not. And what makes this even better is that OP didn't hesitate. He says his husband was actually shocked when OP blocked the divorce withdrawal through his own lawyer. Shocked? Which tells you this guy genuinely expected to be welcomed back once the crisis passed. Like abandonment had an expiration date. Like betrayal only counted while the chemo was happening. That level of entitlement is insane, because what he's really saying is, now that you're useful to me again, now that this marriage won't require effort, now that there's no caregiving attached, I've decided I want it back. No, you don't get to abandon somebody at their most vulnerable point and then stroll back in once they survive. You don't get to outsource the pain and then claim the recovery. You don't get to say, I'm only here for the healthy version. And I think that's why this story makes people so angry. Because it's not just selfish, it's transactional. It turns love into a cost-benefit calculation. OP's husband didn't act like a spouse. He acted like a coward, trying to cut loose what he thought was damaged, then changed his mind when it turned out OP was still going to have a future. And if that still wasn't enough, OP says the husband did everything he could to drag the divorce out after OP refused to reconcile. So not only did he abandon him during cancer, once he realized OP wasn't taking him back, he made the legal process drag on too. And that part matters, because it shows this wasn't remorse. This wasn't regret. This wasn't somebody humbly realizing what he'd done and trying to make it right. This was control. This was, wait, you don't get to reject me after I rejected you. That's the energy. He could leave. He could walk away. He could decide the marriage wasn't worth the burden, but OP wasn't supposed to remember. OP wasn't supposed to have standards. OP wasn't supposed to say no. And the second OP did say no, the game started. Then comes the later update. And honestly, this is where the story finally breathes. OP says the divorce was made official the day before the update. He calls it 4.5 years of hell and being in limbo. He says it was the best sleep he'd had in years. maybe only second to the day he was told there was no evidence of disease. And he says he felt like shouting from the rooftops because he was free. That line is powerful because notice what OP is celebrating. Not revenge, not humiliation, not getting even. Freedom. That's how you know he's healed in more ways than one. And the update gets even better. He says there's still no evidence of disease. He says he got a great new job with the provincial government. He says he's planning a vacation for his 40th birthday. And most importantly, he says he's free. That is the ending this story deserved. Because the husband spent this entire story acting like OP's value depended on whether he was healthy, easy, low maintenance, and convenient. And in the end, OP survived the cancer, survived the abandonment, survived the legal games, and walked out with his future intact anyway. That's the real win. And I also want to touch on one of the comments because it matters. There was somebody trying to play devil's advocate, wondering whether maybe the husband was worried about medical bills. OP shut that down immediately. He explained that he lives in Canada and that his province covered everything. According to him, the only thing he personally paid for was getting the TV hooked up in the hospital room after surgery. So no, there wasn't some noble financial explanation here. This wasn't some secret sacrifice. This wasn't a paper divorce to protect the family story. It was exactly what it looked like. Abandonment. And I'm glad that got addressed, because people will bend themselves in half trying to invent a noble reason for ugly behavior. There wasn't one. This guy left because caregiving would have required character. That's it. And one more thing that quietly makes this story sadder, but healthier, is that OP says he hasn't seen or spoken to his ex in years and doesn't plan to ever again. Good. There are some bridges you don't rebuild. There are some people whose absence is the blessing, because what would there even be to say? Sorry I left you when you had cancer, but in my defense, I thought you might stay sick? No thanks. The truth is, this man gave OP something painful but incredibly valuable. He removed all doubt, no ambiguity, no confusion, no mixed signals, no pretending. OP now knows exactly who his ex is, and he knows it because life put pressure on the relationship and the truth came rushing out. That hurts. But it also frees you, because once somebody shows you they only love the easy version of you, you stop mourning the relationship you had, and you start mourning the one you thought you had. That's a huge difference. And that's why this story lands so well years later. It's not just, look how awful this person was. It's, look what happens when you keep going anyway. OP didn't get the loyal spouse. He didn't get protected from the worst timing imaginable. He didn't get the easy version of survival, but he still got out. He still got healthy. He still got peace. He still got the divorce. He still got his future back. And the ex? The ex gets to live with the fact that when life asked him to be a husband, he answered like a coward. That's the part he can't undo. And honestly, that's what makes this such a satisfying ending. Not because OP got revenge, not because everything was magically easy again, but because he survived long enough to see the truth clearly, and then kept going anyway. He beat the cancer. He outlasted the legal nightmare. And in the end, the person who walked away with a future was him. That's the win. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Was the worst part him leaving 7 days after the diagnosis, or trying to come back once OP was healthy again? Because for me, the comeback attempt might actually be worse. Leaving is evil, but coming back after the chemo's over, that takes a completely different kind of audacity. If you made it all the way to the end, I seriously appreciate you. And if you want more stories where people show you exactly who they are when life gets hard, make sure you like, subscribe, and stick around for more thread tension. Alright guys, peace out guys.